Hey everyone, Al Nocita and Steve Fox from TST Industries here in Florida. Today we're going to discuss cut versus no cut frame sliders. Now, I know what you're saying. Hey Al, this is like Honda versus Yamaha argument. There's no answer, right answer. We're going to try to shed some light on that question and hopefully inform you so you can make a good choice. What does cut and no cut actually mean, and what are the pros and cons of both?
Sure. So cut versus no cut frame sliders, we're really talking about the difference in installation procedure or some things you have to do during the installation for the two different technologies of frame sliders. Whenever you're going for a frame slider, you're going to be mounting these things towards a really strong part of the chassis, usually around the engine, something like that. And typically there will be a point that makes a lot of sense, but there will be a body fairing right in the way of how you want to mount this thing in order to get that good direct line of sight. So for a cut type frame slider, you would actually go ahead and cut your body fairing so that you can get this big bolt directly into that member. On the other hand, you have the no cut versions, which is where engineers will design a mounting feature to try to pick out some different points around the chassis that makes a decent amount of sense. And really the only pro for this is that you won't have to cut your body fairing. Now, that does lead into some issues. As you can see, there runs a heavier risk of this thing breaking off in the event of a crash. This is typically a much stronger method because there's no bending moments involved, less shear. Once you start going into this, you're distributing loads in different ways and you can see what happens. Don't get me wrong, there are some bikes out there where the no-cut version, which basically means that the mounting scheme, it does actually make a little bit more sense because you can distribute the load amongst multiple points, and if you evenly distribute that load well, you can actually end up with a very, very strong frame slider that happens to be a no-cut. And for those types of bikes, it makes sense, go that route. But for a lot of other bikes that are out there, the cut version, so you get that direct line of sight, is really the way to go. So strength is the big pro there for this guy. Installation does get a little bit more difficult because you're going to have to cut up some of your body fairing, so that's a con. But in reality, would I rather cut up a fairing and then have a better chance of saving the rest of the bike in the fairing itself in the event of a crash, rather than trying to save myself a few minutes or whatever at the beginning and then you end up destroying the rest of the bike? To me, it's a no-brainer.
Well, it seems like cutting your fairing, doing it yourself, would be much more beneficial than, let's say, letting the pavement do the cutting. And I think we've got an example of that behind you. And we have one here. Now, high speed, low speed, they going to work?
Let's be honest. If you are doing 150 and you go for a high side, you're not going to be that concerned about how your frame sliders are mounted on your bike. But for most low side crashes, whether that be high or low speed, if the bike is doing a relatively controlled slide, frame sliders are going to help, and you want the type that's going to hold up the best, which is typically the cut version. So we can check out this Suzuki over here, which had a no-cut version on it. We went down recently at a track weekend, and this was a low speed, low side crash. Shouldn't have been that big of a deal, but as you've been demonstrating, that frame slider did break apart. And so all of these body panels now become your sliding features. Ended up in a whole bunch of extra damage that really shouldn't have happened. We got very lucky that our engine case cover didn't end up breaking. Obviously, once you lose your frame slider, this becomes a part that's gonna meet the pavement, and if those things don't hold up, boy, you're talking about some big trouble there.
That's a high dollar frame slider then.
Yeah, you got that right.
Now, going back real quick, just briefly to the installation, you said, and TST's got some new templates and stuff that you're offering now?
We're gonna try, anytime that we feel the cut frame slider is really the way to go, we're gonna try to make it as easy as humanly possible on you guys. So we'll go ahead and do a little bit of the development work for you and create a cutting template that you just mount onto your body fairing, and we'll tell you exactly where to put the hole so that you end up with a seamless finish. There's no chance of you putting the hole in the wrong place and then you're in a little bit more of a mess. So we'll make that super easy for you guys whenever the cut frame slider really makes the most sense.
Fantastic. And cost? Break the bank?
No, these things aren't too bad. And in fact, the cuts can typically be a little bit cheaper because they're a lot simpler to design. So this is like for a Honda, you can get them for 60 bucks, sometimes even less. So
60 bucks, pretty cheap protection, and looks like bang for my buck. I'd go this direction. Like I said, probably some arguments, but hopefully we've shed some light on this subject and kind of informed you so you can make an intelligent choice as to which way to go. So check these out, tstindustries.com. Steve, as always, thanks so much for the help. Hope to see you soon.